Hello everybody, Thomas here. Welcome back to the garden. Today, as we've just entered August, I thought I'd do an early August garden tour. If you'd like to see more regular updates like this, why not subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video, and also let me know in the comments how your gardens are getting on this year, because so far I'm very pleased with how mine's developing. So without further ado, let's begin the look around. Let's start with this courgette here. I sowed this probably back in April now, and I didn't really have anywhere for it to go because I was sort of banking on not all of my seeds germinating, which is what you sort of have to plan for, but the majority of them germinated and it left me with lots of courgettes, so I had to find a pot or a container, whichever I could, and pot it into there. But this pot which I found was quite deep really for what it needed, and I didn't really have all the compost to spare, so I basically filled up the bottom of the pot with just some old branches and pieces of wood and dead twigs, so that I didn't have to fully fill the pot and waste lots of compost and soil on an area which would never actually be used to grow in for this crop. So far I'm quite pleased with how it's growing, although it has only given me 1 or 2 courgettes so far, so fingers crossed that it'll bring me some more in the weeks to come. Also, this one courgette which is currently growing on the plant right now, it was sort of growing into the side of the pot because I planted it slightly lower again to save myself compost, and it's growing into the side of it, which of course is a problem, forcing it to sort of grow into the ground. And I felt the risk of it going mouldy was quite high, so to try and prop it up and force it to go over the top of the pot, I'm using just this old handheld fork to hopefully try and just lift it over the top to give it a better chance of growing. Let's move on to the latest sowings now. So these are some things which I've sown within the last 4 to 5 days at the beginning of August, just as my final chance to get a few crops in before the end of this year's growing season. And so far I'm quite surprised that some things have germinated. For example, the chard that's fully germinated. That was only sown 4 days ago. Kale, that's also germinated. These were all sown in my previous video of what to sow at the beginning of August. So the chard's germinated, my kale's germinated, the beetroots have, and the spinach has. However, so far a couple have not yet germinated, but I was sort of expecting that. So the Swedes have not germinated, the turnips haven't germinated, and neither has the spinach beet, which is a new crop I'm trying this year. However, one crop which has surprised me quite a lot is some pak choi. Now, it's not all germinated, granted, but one of them has germinated within 8 hours, which has absolutely blown me away. I don't know if that's a regular thing. If you do know, please feel free to let me know, because it's something I've never tried before and it's just germinated extremely quickly. Now, you may be wondering why I have quite a few structures, should we call them, around some of my younger crops and more fragile things. So that is simply my defense mechanism against cats. Now, I have some cats, can't say I'm a fan of them, but they are very, very annoying and do not like to seem to get out of my vegetable beds. So to try and counteract this, I've started building these frames around the beds in hope that it'll keep them away. And also it's actually been quite beneficial for my peppers. This is because, you know, it's created like a warmer environment inside of this protection for them, and so far it's actually seemed to help them. And I've also had to build it around some of the new crops I sowed directly into the ground, such as my leeks and radishes. This is again just to keep animals off and also provide a bit more warmth really. I guess that's something which has also come from it. It wasn't intended, but it does seem to have worked like that. And so far, fingers crossed, they haven't been in yet. Now, in between these two structures, I have some Swedes and radishes. along with a singular row of dwarf French beans. Now, so far they've all germinated. However, I've had a couple of incidents with cats again, where they've dug them up and have had to be resown, but also slugs. Slugs seem to enjoy my Swedes, but so far they've only got to one. But I just have to keep my eye out for them. And another thing I've been doing to try and help my dwarf French beans germinate faster, and it has seemed to have worked, is by just covering them with a layer of transparent, sort of like a plastic, and it seemed to have worked so far. Moving on to the bed behind this, it's currently not completely full, but that's because it's where some of my later plantings will go. But at the minute it has a couple of rows of Swedes in, which are doing all right at the minute. They were sown around 4 to 5 weeks ago in plug trays, and we've recently planted them out. But also there's another courgette in here. Now that was in a bed you'll see in a minute, but it was getting a little bit too crowded, so to try and give it a bit more room and breathe better, we just dug it up and popped it into this bed. Now, we didn't know if it was going to react poorly to it, but it seems to have done all right so far, and it's started to produce its first couple of flowers and hopefully soon some courgettes. Runner beans now, and for me, compared to last year, they've been so much better. Last year was actually really poor for them. I'm not too sure why. I don't know if the soil was just poor or they were planted slightly too late and didn't have time to fully develop. But this year they've been much better, and I've done a sort of pyramid shape in a pot, but then we also created a frame along the back of our largest bed where we grow them up. So we plant them into the soil at the back of the beds, and they almost grow up the fence basically. And this year they've fully filled it out, which I'm very pleased with, and we've got quite a few beans from them so far, which we've been using to blanch and then also just to add into the mixed vegetables, which you can boil. For our biggest bed this year, we've decided to mainly plant everything in rows across it, widthways. This just seemed to be the easiest option, and although we can't fully reach the middle, we have a plank of wood which perfectly fits, like down to the centimetre to fit across it, so you know you can shimmy across it and get things from the middle of the bed, and it does work. But in here at the minute we have some lettuce. Now it's been in the ground for probably about a month and a half now, and it's been doing really well for us. It's a variety called Romaine Ballon, I think, and no, it's definitely one I'll be choosing again to produce some really, really big, crunchy, delicious leaves. Although, like most lettuces, it's preferred by the slugs. But what can you do? You just have to keep picking them off, I guess. You know, at the minute with the slightly colder summer we're having in the UK, having these wetter days and then slightly drier nights means you can really find lots of slugs and get rid of them without hurting them, of course. But next to these, we have some spring onions and onions. These spring onions they've not been brilliant so far, I have to be honest. I don't know if it's just the weather where they've been put, but compared to last year, they've not really developed in the same way. Whereas the main, like Stuttgart onions next to them, have been much, much better. Now these ones here are almost ready to be harvested and started to be dried, which will probably happen within around the next week. Alongside these, we then have it's sort of just a full sea of beetroots, which is what it's turned out to be. They were originally in rows when we first sowed them, but you guessed it, down to cats, they've been dug up multiple times by them and sort of been dispersed all over the place, and it's just sort of left us with this forest of beetroots, really, I guess. You can see one on the end has bolted, but we're going to try and let it run to seed so we can hopefully harvest them and see what we can do with them. Now, in between them, if you look very carefully, it looks like grass, but it's actually leeks. Now, these were in a line. I don't need to mention how they ended up in this clump, but that's where they are. And slowly I've been pricking them out individually one by one, some into plug trays and others just into the ground, like in the structure in the first bed. But you know, what can you do? It's annoying, but you've got to work with these things sometimes. Now along the front of these beds we have some peppers. I think they're cayenne or cayenne peppers. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but I think they're that variety. Now I don't really have anywhere where we can put them in a greenhouse or somewhere warmer, because we've run out of room really, so we've had to keep them in their pots. But they seem to be doing alright, although as of yet they've not actually produced us any peppers, which is sort of the main reason why we have them. But we'll have to keep seeing how they get on. There's no point throwing them away, so we'll see if they can produce anything, even if it's just one. That will be better than nothing. Now down to the smallest and shadiest bed in the garden. We currently have tomatoes and courgettes in here. Now we had a bit of a game to play with the courgettes when they first went into here. You see, we basically put the courgettes and cucumbers together. We grouped them together, but kept labels of them separately. Now when they were potted on, those labels were lost. So it was sort of anybody's guess. It was a 50-50 chance whether they were going to be courgettes or cucumbers. And funnily enough, every single one of them turned out to be a courgette. So we ended up with no cucumbers this year, which is a bit of a shame, but we've ended up with lots of courgettes. And again, because we ran out of room, we had to just shove as many in as possible, but just prune them so that they wouldn't invade each other's space. And we've ended up with 3 courgette plants and 3 tomato plants in here, and they all seem to be growing quite happily together. It's all a bit of a mess really, it's just a sea of green, but they are growing, and hopefully we can get some sunnier weather to allow them to start to ripen. And in fact we did try and get 4 tomato plants in here, but they didn't quite fit, if you hadn't have already guessed. So we put one just in the end of the bed, in the end of our biggest bed, but that doesn't seem to have grown quite as well. I don't know why, but we'll have to see if that one can grow. We've also put some more tomato plants into grow bags, and we've sat that on just an old toy chest. And so far they're growing. They're probably growing the best really, because I think it's because they have more space, so they've been able to spread up the canes and along the fence. Ideally we'd want to grow these in a greenhouse or a cold frame, but our cold frame is being used for seeds at the minute, so we've got to keep them outside, and they seem to be happy enough. Now you can't talk about your garden without talking about the failures which have gone on within them. And for us this year, that is the cucumbers, which we did try and get a few more by sowing some more and putting them into grow bags, but they just seem to have not played ball this year and have just died. I've never done cucumbers in grow bags. I've always done them into pots or the beds, but this year we didn't have any room to put the cucumbers into the beds, so grow bags it was for them, and they don't seem to have responded very nicely to that, so they've basically killed themselves, I think, is the easiest way to put it. But not all is doom and gloom, because near them we have our flowers. We sowed some wild flowers into the long bed here, and in the height of, well, what has been summer so far, they were really nice. They've started to die back now, but inside the wildflowers I also planted some cosmos, calendulas and some sweet williams, and they are seeming to start to flower now. Well, at least the cosmos and calendulas have flowered. The sweet williams not quite yet, but hopefully they should do in the coming weeks. Now onto the final plants in the garden, and that is our herbs. We have two little plants of thyme, 1 mint, 1 sage, and 1 rosemary, and they're all growing very happily, I say, at the minute, although the thyme does look a little bit sad, and I can only think it's to do with the slightly cooler weather and more rain we're having, because obviously they're Mediterranean plants, so they're not used to all this rain we're getting here. But we'll hope that they can just survive this year, and next year can bring us lots of nice scented flowers and fragrances to use. Now that has been my early August garden tour. I hope you have enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comments down below, and also let me know if you would like to see more frequent tours like this. But for now, I hope you've enjoyed. Please consider subscribing to our channel, it'd be much appreciated, and leaving a like on this video. But I'll see you in the next one.